Although today it is cool to be gay, especially in Pride Month, that was not the case in the 1980s, which made Gaten Drugas, a male flight attendant, the perfect villain during the AIDS epidemic in the United States back in the 1980s. And from this index case, the term patient zero was introduced into the American lexicon, actually by a typographical error. And from this index case, we were introduced to what became the Typhoid Mary poster child for the biggest American public health crisis of that era. But AIDS was a sexually transmitted disease, or STD, permitting no wider community spread, providing generally for those that were outside of the sexually active gay man or intravenous drug user population relative safety and social distance. But today, for most Americans, the paradigm or generally accepted theory for infectious disease most often comes from what most have seen in the movies. It's all that they know. Like in the director Wolfgang Petersen's 1909 film Outbreak, based on the Richard Preston novel The Hot Zone, and with its all-star A-list cast of actors, including the patient zero portrayed by Patrick Dempsey, who, according to the film at least, had suffered a zoonotic evolution from a small, white-headed capuchin monkey he had adopted as his own, loving animals, but who had been infected with the Motaba virus, a fictional virus based upon Ebola, which had first been discovered, according to the CDC, in a river in 1976. And this exciting movie trails the wake of his infection spread as a team of government and military scientists rushed to the small town of Cedar Creek to attempt to develop an antidote, locate the zoonotic source, and treat the sick. And since December 2019, the entire world has had an opportunity to at least be an extra, without a SAG card, in an exciting medical thriller drama. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, an independent candidate for U.S. Congress, but in 1995, when Outbreak hit the theaters, I was actually performing a job in the military, much like Morgan Freeman, Cuba Gooding, Rene Russo, and Kevin Spacey were in the movie, but in the Army, essentially as a biological warfare planner, helping to develop a methodology to prevent this type of scenario, in part through a natural occurrence, but in, to use the popular term, engaged in dual-use research of concern. Although most times not in the laboratory, just looking at books. And no, I am not a doctor, nor have I ever played one on TV. But for the next few minutes, we are going to delve into the infectious disease paradigm, or generally accepted theory, big term used by scientists and also political scientists, of exactly how a pandemic or disease outbreak occurs, and prepared to be astounded and amazed as we try to piggyback on the example framed in the public mind through the character portrayed by Patrick Dempsey, and note how a little Hollywood movie magic may have misdirected your attention during an actual public health crisis. Rules of the road in a pandemic dictate that what you don't know can or may kill you. You have over 1 million Americans dead, and this virus isn't stupid. So politicians, take note. Are we all suited up like Kevin Spacey and Cuba Gooding Jr.? Then let's blow this popsicle stand and get into the grunge. Show me the money. And before getting back to Patrick Dempsey, let's just take a little bit of time to stick with the team of medical experts who rushed into Cedar Creek as the quick reaction response team, which suggests that, at least in movie land, the government has some specialists who know all about these problems that a little town like Cedar Creek can't handle. I guess UFOs show up. Does that capability really exist? Do UFOs really exist? You had a pandemic and over 6 million fatalities worldwide with some first-hand experience, so you can tell me. Why didn't somebody just ask the aliens at Area 51 how to wipe this pandemic virus out, right? I'm pretty sure that has to still be in the SOP. Or perhaps this novel coronavirus has even stumped the aliens, and so we're on our own, I guess. But it at least sounds like a good idea to try to know the rules of the game before you get into the game. And in the film, we can clearly see that Kevin Spacey, Rene Russo, and Cuba Gooding Jr. have already established some procedures and protocols devoted to make sure that they are not infected by this highly contagious and lethal Mataba virus disease, while they rush to accomplish the mission much like you would do in an aircraft if there was a sudden loss of pressure. Donning your oxygen mask has been deployed from the overhead panel, enabling you only to attempt to assist others after you have helped yourself in communal responsibility. Safety first, and that kid by your side just has to wait until you get your stuff together and your plan. And so they have the biohazard suits and face masks that have actually been modified to look like space suits in the movie, so you can see the beautiful faces of the A-list actors in the theaters. And they have an established game plan ready to roll to deliver to the folks in Cedar Creek. So, whether the government and military actually have this quick response capability in the event of an infectious disease outbreak, you have 2 years of experience to determine for yourself. But let's rewind to the very beginning of the film with this wonderful quote, very impressively framed as a quote from a Nobel Prize winning microbiologist. Nobel Prize alone sounds very impressive, but actually he was just a young research assistant on the team. Kind of like winning a Emmy Award with the team, or a Pulitzer Prize with the team, but still the youngest person to win the prize ever. Which probably only a microbiologist watching the movie and cared about in 1995 or knew about enough to say, yes, I know that doctor, very familiar with his work, and feel a sense of connection and return on investment, if not feelings of efficacy and empowerment in this immersion entertainment experience. Joshua Lidberg is the name. You should know, PhD, says the single biggest threat to mankind's continued dominance on the planet is the virus. Jeopardy question, true or false? You saw the movie. You had 2 years of pandemic experience. Don a mask, close your business, stop going to school. More people died than during the Holocaust. Canceled vacation plans, stayed at home, stopped going to church and watching Netflix, got vaccinated. Would you agree with the introduction line in this outbreak film? The single biggest threat to mankind's continued dominance on the planet is the virus, conquered by a single strand of RNA. True or false? This virus isn't stupid. Dun, 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 dun. Time's up. Okay. Go back to grammar school for a second. Hop in your time-traveling DeLorean, where you learned a simple phrase to recite like a Bible verse in class. Viruses are the what? And they sit with me, class. Most abundant biological particles in the world. Coronavirus so loved the world that he gave his only begotten virus. And maybe it's been a little while since you sat in a grammar school classroom, especially after the pandemic. And maybe the list of harmful viruses to mankind have been forgotten. Maybe you didn't go through that in your science class. Or maybe you were absent that day, sick with the early version of COVID-19. But as of just before the pandemic, there were only a total of 219 viruses harmful to mankind. So we do a little simple math, grab our pocket calculator, and application of the law of large numbers, which we should remember from probability and statistics in junior high school. We would take 219 and divide by the quantity of the most abundant biological particles in the world. Just insert any big number and arrive the answer. Gobbledygook out. No. Viruses are not the single biggest threat to mankind's continued dominance on the planet. They are, in fact, the very least likely emerging threat to mankind. And a movie used some PhD credentials with a Nobel laureate to fool you into getting excited about continuing to watch the film, not walking out, demanding your money back. And now you still believe what you saw in a movie as real science. You know, you're not supposed to believe everything you see on television or in the movies. And that's why they call it science fiction. And use that as your template for survival in a pandemic. I know it's worked for you so far, so just keep going with it. As Dr. Walensky said, in a pandemic, human choices have not served us well, and some far more than others. May they now rest in peace. Alrighty then. That is the big picture biology that you should have known from grammar school. Don't worry, because pandemics, according to the Data Institute at the University of San Francisco, are historically associated with fear. Have a little fear, confusion, I'm so confused, and despair. I think I'm gonna have to stop living here. I can't go on. Oh, God. A big bad, brave alpha males and Wonder Woman with whatever Briggs Myers personality type suddenly get scared. It happens. Lose their sense of confidence and self-assurance, start crying, spoiling their dresses, and maybe even turn to prayer. So always bring along an extra pair of underpants, I always say. But get it out your system, shake it off, and get your head back in the game, because we have a pandemic, hero, and time stops for no end. Unless you die of coronavirus. Then time stops for you. And there is a whole lot more science that may be really interesting. Like those, vexing, philosophical questions of the meaning of pandemic. Especially for those science buffs who spent 2 years engaged in intellectual topics involving spike proteins, engagement at the furin cleavage site, and the ACE2 enzyme. Very fascinating. But in a pandemic, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Or gas at the pump today, now going over $5 a gallon. What did the president say on the anniversary of the pandemic? We know what we have to do. Defeat this virus. Put the nation on a war footing. And that's not just hyperbole. And it's actually not. So let's break from the team huddle and get back to Patrick Dempsey and his zoonotic source monkey friend that put the small town of Cedar Creek on a destruction path where Morgan Freeman wanted to just incinerate the whole town and save the world. Let's try not to go there. So Patrick Dempsey is on a bus, you recall, at the pet store, running all around Cedar Creek, obviously sick, only caring about himself and what he needs to do for himself, being selfish and spreading his contagion all over everybody, not even caring, who apparently never depart the town of Cedar Creek. Nobody is leaving. They got this sick man in their town getting ready to kill them, and nobody's leaving. They're just like, hey, look at that sick guy. Because the Mataba virus, at least in the movie, decided to just stay there, not hop on any other human host. Maybe nobody ever left that town, except for, guys who brought the monkey and Patrick Dempsey, they get out every now and then. With what we often describe in the science literature as no wider community spread. Write that down. That's an important, epidemiology term. No wider community spread. You can talk about that with your friends on Facebook. And in the movie, that makes a little sense. A virus requires a living host. Otherwise, it's just kind of an expectancy of life until it, jumps onto somebody. And if everyone stays in Cedar Creek, the epidemic is contained in Cedar Creek. Ain't gonna go nowhere. Why Morgan Freeman decided at the end of the film that the virus had stayed in Cedar Creek would suddenly decide to take a world tour and set off a pandemic, I leave for you to discuss with others regarding plot holes on Facebook with other amateur sleuths. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, Bruce Aylward, the real pandemic, the assistant director for the World Health Organization, after completing a 40-page report that even he had noticed nobody had read, just wasting time. Hey, I got a pandemic, I think I write a report. Provided a quick summary or things you need to know about the novel coronavirus synopsis in an interview that was published in Vox Media at the very beginning of March 2020. But also, nobody read. Bruce, who's Bruce? Tell me Bruce Springsteen, Bruce Willis. And according to this expert epidemiologist, the bright line rule for infectious disease is that getting the virus, generally speaking, is a function of coming into contact with a person who is spreading the virus, which could mean anything from a case like, Typhoid Mary, Gaten Dugas with the STD, or coughing and sneezing out droplets, or maybe touching contaminated stuff, or people, or even like leprosy, unclean, or even coming into the iron sights of a dude trying to attack you with a biological weapon. Happened to the Assyrians. The Assyrians tried it with their enemies. A wide range of possibilities on biological terror. And this is one of those interesting things, is that, if we decide that we're going to nuke you, you're going to know that like immediately. I nuke you, somebody's going to notice a mushroom cloud, chemical, we got this wonderful thing, I'm like, it's immediate. Ever been tear gassed? Do the cops show up The army show up, tear gas you, and then you feel the effects, like maybe like 3 weeks later? No, that doesn't happen. But when it comes to biology, it takes a little time. You get a little fuse, it's like debt cords when you're trying to explode something, Give yourself enough, debt cords so this way, you can like burn that out and then it's going to explode. It's a time charge. But we got a wide range of possibilities. But basically, you can't get infected by a virus that is not even there. Just like you can't spread a virus that you don't even have. Kind of like hitting a target you don't even have. Can't do it. Too easy. Anybody confused? Clear as mud? Whatever. Step 2, according to this expert in public health from the WHO, after coming into contact with that person who has the virus in whatever form, gas canister in his nose or in his saliva or in his sexually transmitted particles, whatever, which scientists call exposure. Exposure. Reach out to someone. A function of getting the virus is dependent on how much virus the person is shedding. And you may recall, after the emergence of the Delta variant, a lot of headlines in the news about viral load. Another science term we added to our vocabulary in a pandemic because the Delta variant of concern, VOC, descendant variants of concern for those that really got into the science, had a viral load that was 1,270 times higher than its predecessor, which sounds like a lot. And actually, that is only a part of the consideration because it got taken advanced class, especially with a hyper-replicative virus. Okay, it's fornicating like bunny rabbits, which is working overtime for a reason. You have to be exposed to this person shedding or passing the viral particles that are actually viable. Hyper-replicating. He's more kind of like that guy that needs the high-capacity magazine to hit one thing. He's not a sniper, and so there's a lot of shots that are missing the side of a barn. An infected person may be shedding a lot, but some of them may well be duds that cannot infect you, Bounce right off you like you're Superman. You're not really Superman, you're just getting duds thrown at you. They could have just become non-viable by themselves, kind of like a miscarriage. I tried to have a baby, but, it didn't work out. Or they may have just been imperfect from the start, I don't know. Just happened, I don't know. Takeaway here is that not all viral load presents a danger. That's just it, Sometimes, they just, produce, garbage. That's why, actors try to keep doing a lot of stuff because maybe something's going to be good and they'll make it in Hollywood and all that. And this is why Bruce Aylward has a third step, noting that getting the virus is a function of how long a person is exposed. Monty Hall said, I was an overnight success. Only took me 50 years. And scientists describe this quorum, or necessary minimum number, as infectious dose. But as of May 7, 2021, and even today, at least according to the CDC, the actual nation's leading infectious disease control experts, if you thought it was Dr. Fauci, you are wrong. Wrong answer. Bonk. Which you should remember if you paid attention during the movie Contagion. That Gwyneth Paltrow. Okay. What character did Lawrence Fishburne play? Dr. Fauci or Dr. Walensky? Hint, hint. He was located in Atlanta, not D.C. And if you don't know that the CDC is in Atlanta 2 years into a pandemic, just remember that this virus isn't stupid. Don't worry, I am very, very certain that the dinosaurs who went extinct during the Ice Age probably believe they didn't have to learn about the weather and its effects. And, it seemed to have worked out for them. Now we have explored a lot of plot holes in the 1995 release of Outbreak, which I actually didn't even see until after I stopped being a biological warfare planner. Just picked it up on HBO one night. But that was just a movie, science fiction, and not real, like the work that I got to do. Let's see how much attention you were paying, however, to the pandemic movie in which you are at least an extra right now. And hopefully not like that guy in the red shirt on Star Trek going down to the planet and not coming back. In the pandemic, you should know that the first reported case had arrived in Seattle from Wuhan. If you don't know that, 2 years into a pandemic, okay, you haven't been doing homework. And he was a traveler in his mid-30s, so a millennial with some discretionary income, so to speak, to celebrate the Chinese New Year actually in China. Not Chinatown, not going to the Chinese restaurant. He's actually in China. Why not go to Beijing, Hong Kong, check out the Great Wall? Who knows? Hey, he was in China celebrating Chinese New Year's. And when you had enough money to take a 20-hour flight, then you can compare boring lives. He was in China. You weren't. But the American coronavirus patient zero is in Wuhan Airport. Pretty busy airport. On a Trans-Pacific, it's the 7th largest city in China. Pretty busy airport. On a Trans-Pacific flight, lands in Seattle Tacoma International Airport and has no idea that he is infected with a highly contagious disease. Maybe he has some, slight sign. That, coughing, sneezing, running nose is not a symptom, but a sign of infection, an asymptomatic sign of infection, permitting asymptomatic transmission on certain conditions. If he is infecting anyone, he is not even going to know it that way, because whatever viral load that he is shedding has to incubate. Gonna be like that death tour. It's gonna take some time. And when he gets to the airport, apparently he has no family or friends to come to pick him up, or doesn't want to inconvenience anyone. He's very, very, nice, caring, thoughtful person, or just like sharing rides with others. And he is apparently a little frugal, likes to, get around and meet new people or whatever, because he decided to take a share ride with a few other people, total strangers, he might potentially infect on his 25-mile ride out to the vicinity of Everett, Washington. And the American patient zero spends about 4 days just going about his normal life, going to work. Remember, we haven't shut down anything in January 2020. Going to business lunches, and then suddenly he notices he has some influenza-like symptoms that have been persistent. He freaks out and remembers, whoa, I was in Wuhan, maybe I got the dreaded Wuhan virus. And he decides to take himself to a clinic. Okay, he doesn't have, he's got all this money, but he decided he's going to go to a clinic where he can sit in a waiting room with other people who go to the clinic and infect other people with this is a guy, he didn't want to inconvenience anybody, so he takes a share ride. Okay, again, maybe he's a gregarious guy. He wants to, talk with people in the pandemic, even though he knows he came from a pandemic and he's got deadly disease. With what he now suspects might be the dreaded coronavirus. And sure enough, on January 21st, human choice has not been our friend. And sure enough, on January 21st, 2020, medical authorities in the state of Washington announced that he is, in fact, the very first reported case in America suffering with mild pneumonia. So, how many people do you think he infected while not knowing that he was infected? Between January and February in 2020, the Chinese and the WHO went to China and examined 55,924 reported cases and dispatched 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists to perform contact tracing, key to disrupting the Ebola outbreak. The most effective and efficient means for case identification, which makes sense. If you have an infectious virus, you probably gave it to somebody else you came in contact with. Too easy. However, not until April does the story appear in the New York Times to report that the American patient zero had come into close contact with as many as 68 people after he departed Wuhan on his little winter vacation. And by this time, while remaining anonymous, he apparently got a publicist to issue a press statement, which is a pretty market-savvy thing to do. Normal people just don't say, hey, I'm going to do a press release to tell the world who may be concerned about an anonymous person. He's trying to, keep his privacy. I don't want anybody to know who I am. And he lets the world know that he is fine and recovering. Who in hell cares? You're nobody. What's going to publish an anonymous book? How I Survived the Coronavirus by Anonymous. If nobody knew me and I wanted to remain anonymous, I would not have published a press statement. But maybe that is what you do if you have the discretionary income to leave Everett, Washington to celebrate the New Year in Wuhan with nobody who wants to pick you up when you return. And obviously infecting nobody inside your home. Maybe you live alone because you went to the clinic alone and tried to meet other people, start a conversation with your lethal deadly disease. And a scientist by April had determined that not even one of the 68 people he had exposed, science term, to his virus were infected, which could just mean that his virus had not yet gone through an incubation period, following the science to make him infectious. Just because you're infected does not mean you are infectious. Shedding a sufficient infectious dose, science terms, in viral load, science terms, to present a problem or danger to anyone else. Why are you running around in a mask? Are you infected? You gonna infect anybody? No. Okay, whatever. No wider community spread. No wider community spread. But his case by April 2020 had baffled even the scientists. Apparently, or they were saying that, because his unique strain of virus, which he could only have gotten in Wuhan, was found in 39 other people all around the great state of Washington. If he has no wider community spread from himself, how is his virus adopting an independent lifestyle, traveling around the great Pacific Northwest by itself? So even with the very first case, this problem of no wider community spread is at least an anomaly in science and infectious disease, or some revolutionary presentation to alter the infectious disease paradigm. Remember that word? Paradigm. That we saw with Patrick Dempsey in the movie Outbreak. Don't tell me, like they said in the movie, it's airborne. And also missing everyone in his line of sight and traveling on tour by itself. Really? Well, it's got a publicist. It's certainly in the newspapers. But it doesn't happen. But this virus is stupid. There are similar cases, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. Similar case in Skagit County, Washington. Only one man, member of a choir, who believes that the Lord's praise can't be sung without him, gets infected and attends the choir rehearsal. How does he get infected with a virus that isn't even present in his own county? A place in Washington where nobody would probably go. And with no wider community spread until he gets to choir rehearsal. How does he suddenly become contagious when he arrives at choir rehearsal? What? Is his virus was waiting to meet Jesus? It seems to suggest that even if he was infected, the virus arose or appeared all by itself at the choir rehearsal. In terms of being infectious, something else happened. And he just happened to be there when it happened. By the science. There is another case in New York. Jewish man who lives in Westchester. Very, very nice, ritzy area outside of Manhattan. He takes the long, nice discretionary income. He takes the long, I have a friend, he has nice, sports car out there in Westchester. Corvette. He takes the Long Island Railroad every day to Grand Central Station, where 750,000 commuters pass through each day. And he crosses 42nd Street every day to go to his law practice. You got a law practice on 42nd Street, you ain't poor. And he's got elderly clients, the most vulnerable to this disease in terms of fatality rate. All week long, he's seeing these old people in his law practice, making a lot of money. But he has no wider community spread from himself until he attends synagogue on Saturday, stays for a funeral for a Holocaust survivor, which had to have been in the newspaper, and then sticks around for a joint bar and bat mitzvah, which had to be in the newspaper, and comes in contact with over 1,000 people. Is there a novel coronavirus that gets the Holy Spirit when it hears religious songs and just suddenly becomes infectious? I gotta go, spread the coronavirus to the people spreading the word of the Lord. I don't know. Seems kind of odd. In a case study and science report, and after science report. Throughout the first year of the pandemic in the United States, the most repeated clinical finding, was that there was no wider community spread. That didn't make headlines, but if you read the reports, you would keep seeing this one line, no wider community spread. What's up with that? Even outside nursing homes for the elderly and veterans care facilities, where you had outbreaks, exploding infections. When it comes to infection transmissibility, little, science lesson, a virus has no independent choice. It cannot express the preference. Well, I would prefer to infect these people, like this virus did, even aboard the Princess Diamond, a luxury cruise ship. Viruses got class that began its journey in Yokohama, expressing a preference for American passengers and crew. Do American passengers go to the same places on cruise ships? Yeah, they probably do. They're probably, going to the buffet that only has, American hot dogs. So they don't want to, could happen. But do American passengers and crew go to the same place? That's kind of a question. How is it only, finding these Americans? It's got like a homing device or what? With infections that continue to rise even after the ship went into lockdown. It's kind of a question. Well, maybe the person was infected and now they're locked inside, so now they're infecting other people. Yeah, but how is it getting through the door and infecting other people? That's kind of, I know, it's airborne. Okay, whatever. And this is the virus that had caused an outbreak aboard the Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, where a helicopter ferries between ships in the carrier group depart and return just about 24 hours a day, which you probably only know if you've been in a carrier group. I was supposed to be in a carrier group going to Rwanda, but I missed the ship. I had to go to OCS. But the virus stayed aboard the aircraft carrier with no wider community spread, not going to the other ships in the carrier group. What? Wanted to stay around the nuclear power? Maybe it's like this alien, a life form that needed to get the reactor, whatever. The virus stayed aboard the aircraft carrier. No wider community spread, which a highly contagious virus normally simply does not do. It may not be stupid, but it simply has no choice who it will infect. It's kind of, opportunistic, random, based upon, what is there. And a recent study involving the Delta variant between August and December 2021, Cornell University did the same thing, infecting only students on the campus with no wider community spread in the town or surrounding counties. But sees the gates for the school and decides, no, I'm just going to stay here. I want to check out, the library, which is, by definition, not a highly contagious disease. But try to convince Morgan Freeman because he still wants to incinerate the entire town to stop the spread of the virus. So, heroes or extras in a pandemic movie, let's go for a real quick review of what we have learned today that we did not learn by watching science fiction movies about infectious disease outbreaks. Now, they've been entertaining, but, whatever. 1, science fiction movies are called science fiction for a reason, and if you still don't understand that, you may need to rewind or just live long and prosper. 2, viruses are not the biggest threat to the dominance of mankind, even if a PhD Nobel laureate said it, and are in fact the least likely emerging disease threat. If you see a new emerging virus on the scene, especially with a publicist and doing interviews and all that kind of stuff, kind of like that guy, nobody, and went to Wuhan and came back and said, hey, I'm anonymous and I want to have a press statement. You need to ask a lot of questions. That just sounds, a little suspicious to a scientist. 3, if you find yourself in a pandemic, you may need to start boning up on those old science books you decided in high school you would never need. Wouldn't apply to real life. And maybe some math too, just in case. This virus isn't stupid, and it's definitely doing a good job, even getting into good schools. Dr. Fauci can say all he wants in the movies, number 4, but the CDC director is the leading infectious disease control expert in a pandemic. So write that down if you need to to do something to help you remember that, to tie a string around your finger or whatever. Take some Ben Carson memory pills. 5. Getting the virus is a function of whether someone's got it, how long they're exposed, and how much virus they are shedding. And we got a nice list of also a nice science words to share with our friends. Sound like we're educated on a pandemic, like viral load, infectious dose, shedding, viability. Add that to, the other wonderful terms, H2 enzyme, and furin cleavage site engagement, and then you can talk about, the existential meaning of the pandemic in a pandemic. And finally, the big, huge segue. If you totally missed the title in this video, no wider community spread. If you see that term coming up multiple times in science reports, in a pandemic especially that affects you, it has altered your life radically to become that virus that is a threat to your dominance. It probably won't be in the news. In the science reports, if you see no wider community spread from a highly contagious disease, then Houston, you have a problem. And you're going to need that reentry sequence soon, because the world is getting really big in our front window. Bonus points if you can name that movie, but don't sweat it if you can't. If you have to look it up, you have a pandemic, which should be your highest priority, unless you want to hang out with the dinosaurs who blew up the weather and its effects in the Ice Age. This briefing is unclassified, as you were. My name is Major Mike Webb. By God, I am running for U.S. Congress. Next year, make the right choice, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.